Hello and welcome to Between Two COOs, where phenomenal chief operating officers come to share their knowledge, advice, and at the very end, a crazy story. I'm your host, Michael Kanag, and occasionally I like to bring on a CEO to bring their perspective and also learn a bit about their industry. That in mind, our guest today is Dan Sroker, co-founder and CEO of Rewind, a personalized tool that uses AI to basically augment human memory. Dan calls it a co-pilot for your mind. And if Dan's name rings a bell, it's because he founded Optimizely and grew it to 120 million in ARR. He was also a key member of President Obama's campaign back in 2008, where he helped pioneer the use of data to optimize fundraising, media, the entire thing, which was a major factor in the election win. It's also when we first got to know each other, albeit briefly. Dan, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So here's how I'm thinking about this. There's so much to talk about. Let's start with Rewind, dive into some AGI, and then get into operations, because after all, this is an ops podcast. Sound like a plan?
Sounds great.
All right, wonderful. Well, I mentioned a little bit about Rewind. Give us the nickel tour.
Yeah, so Rewind is a truly personalized AI. There's a lot of AI solutions out there today that lets you ask any general question and you'll get the same or similar response to anyone else. But the inspiration for our product came out of this realization that we can use technology to augment our human capabilities and give us superpowers. For me, that happened personally when about 20 years ago when I started to go deaf. And in my 20s, I realized only when getting a hearing aid how much I had lost. And that ability to gain it all back in an instant really felt like gaining a superpower. To lose a sense and gain it back again is quite magical. And that put me on a hunt for ways technology can augment human capabilities. And so lucky for us is that intersected with this now very exciting wave of technology around AI. So we've kind of pioneered using all the data about you, everything you've seen, said, or heard on your Mac, and now as of yesterday on your iPhone, and making it searchable and making it AI-able, if that's now a verb, where you can now use AI to ask any question about anything you've seen, said, or heard. So simple things as writing you an email or reminding you like, hey, how do I know this Michael guy? And going back and actually seeing all the times we've interacted, seeing the touch points of our past synthesized for you is really does feel like gaining a superpower.
And I love it because I have a horrible memory and it's getting worse, right? Because that's what happens as we get older. And so when I saw what you were working on, I was like, oh, this is pretty interesting. I call him, like, my partner, we like to joke that she's my external hard drive.
Mine as
so
well.
Maybe this will
Yeah. It was interesting, actually. Memory. I started this journey where I had hearing loss, and I started going on this research expedition on what are other human capabilities like hearing that people don't realize is quite as bad as it is. It gets worse as you get older. And the one that really stood out was memory. Studies show that we forget 90% of our experiences after just 1 week. It follows what's called the forgetting curve. And not only that, but typically your memory gets worse every year after you turn 20. So you turn 20, your memory peaks, and then every year thereafter it gets worse. And on top of that, most people don't realize it. So you've got this like already base level of memory that's pretty bad. You don't know what you don't know, so you don't realize how much you're forgetting often. And then it gets worse every year, and that's kind of a boiling frog dynamic where you kind of thought you had good memory, and then all of a sudden you start realizing, boy, I don't know how I know this person, or what was my action item for that last meeting. And that's where we saw this huge opportunity to use AI to augment our natural biological limited memory with a super intelligent memory.
This is interesting because we're talking about memory augmentation. We're also talking about what happens as you get older. Every now and then, I like to take a question from the audience. And this one comes from my colleague, Justin Riley, who's the CEO of Wavelo, which is one of the companies that makes up the Two COOs family. Justin asks, and he takes a very similar approach, by the way. He thinks about AI not as replacement, but as augmentation. And so he asks, how does Rewind thread that needle of being a useful recall tool, but not changing the fundamental makeup of how a human experiences memory? And I think that's the end of the quote, but I think an extension of that is, if we rely so much on something else to remember things for us, does our memory just go out the door because we're no longer trying to recall?
It's a really fascinating question, one that I've thought about. And if you look at the history of this question, the analogies can actually maybe be pretty illuminating. There was a time in my childhood where I had to remember the phone number of my friends. If I wanted to actually call them, I had to remember it and I had to dial it in. I didn't actually have to put an area code in, which is probably crazy for kids these days. Why? You didn't have to put an area code in. You just put in the number, and the phone would ring, and and I knew my best 5 friends. I knew their phone numbers. Today, I don't know anyone's phone numbers. I know my wife's number. I know my own number because people ask me for that. But then everything else is in my phone. And like, am I any worse off because I don't remember my friends' phone numbers? No. Like, it's just a piece of technology that can augment something that otherwise I would have to memorize, and now I don't. Another example is getting from point A to point B. When I grew up, you had to know cross streets. You had to know like how to get from one place to another because of, that's the way, just how we navigated the world. And then, this website called MapQuest came along, and then now today's Google Maps. And you don't have to know any of that. You don't have to remember cross streets. You just put in your destination. It will dynamically decide how best to get you there through the traffic that's out in the road, and your life is better for it. So I don't think we lose anything by outsourcing parts of our mind or parts of our memory to technology. It's not everything. It's the parts that technology is well served to store, things like numbers, things like directions and locations. And there's so many other parts of your mind that are like that you don't need to remember. It feels maybe nostalgic to think, oh, well, would I be my own self if I don't remember all of these facts about something? And I would argue that it actually creates space. It creates creativity in your mind. So you're not obsessed with what was that thing I was supposed to do. You're not racking your brain. Every moment you're racking your brain trying to remember something is a moment you're not thinking about the future or connecting the dots or being creative. So I see it very much as a pedestal in which our minds can evolve to become greater and better, not worse and limited because we're now in some dystopian, Wall-E universe. We're just sitting around in a scooter, disconnected from reality. I think it's quite the opposite.
And it's interesting, another area, because I was also thinking about how does tech augment my memory in general? And I have Google Home displays throughout my house. I also have 2 little kids. And so many of the memories that I have forgotten come back to me as soon as I see a photo of my kid eating ice cream upside down on something crazy like that. And I'm like, oh, wow. And the more I see these pictures, the more I remember it. And I assume the same thing is happening for my kids. Maybe they remember things in greater detail or even in greater breadth from age 2 than they would have otherwise. So I think that'll also be an interesting experiment.
Yeah, in many ways, our memories are encoded in a way that are very hard to retrieve linearly, but can be retrieved through recognition. Photos does that, music does that for some people, smells do that for others. So people, even with advanced dementia, can recall and like retrieve parts of their mind that many had thought were gone forever through these kind of sensorial experiences of smells and music and dance. And so that's, I think, another way, again, we're augmenting and making us better through technology, not making us worse, because the worst thing is have it in your mind, you can't retrieve it. It's like a vault with no key. But with technology, you can get to those memories and cherish them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about Rewind, and a big part of it, the way it works is it's a desktop application that you install, and it essentially sees everything on your desktop. It listens to your conversations, both the input and the output, and then it does this magical thing of somehow compressing it to not take up a lot of space, and then integrates ChatGPT as you described so that you can query everything. It's all indexed, etc. There's obviously some privacy things that we need to talk about. How have you approached that?
The approach starts with the realization that there is nothing more important than the trust and privacy of our users. And we started with that. I mean, we call it privacy or private by design or privacy first. We started as the foundation of thinking how we built this product. We could have built what we built entirely as a cloud-based web app. That's my background. Optimizely was a SaaS web product. I know JavaScript quite well. I could have helped build that. Instead, we did the crazy thing is we pivoted from what was a product we had before called Scribe, an online meeting bot. We pivoted from a cloud-based technology that I knew intimately well to an entirely new domain of technology I knew nothing about, native macOS, low-level system, optimized software, because of the fact that now we could offer a product entirely local, or at least all the recordings would be stored locally. That was a decision we made, recognizing that the convenience and value of what we're offering was quite high. But at the same time, if you could give that and give people the assurance that no one like us, like if we're compelled as a company to look at some of these recordings. We can't. Like, if we're subpoenaed, we can't do it. There's nothing. It's on your disk. We don't have access to it. Your employer doesn't have access to it. Only you have access to your data. And so we thought if we could do that and give you the convenience, that's the best of both worlds. So that's where we started with, was just this premise that, okay, we need to focus on a privacy first approach. What we do is unique, it's new, it's different. For people to get comfortable with it initially, it needs to show that we care, and not just that we talk the talk, but we walk the walk. What we found is interesting. So we started with that approach, and surprisingly, a lot of people were like, oh, this is amazing, I'll use it right away. And then as soon as they get to that aha moment using our product, it's usually, an example would be something that they couldn't have found any other way, or maybe they're writing an email and they hit discard instead of send, and or a tab crash, or some information that they really needed disappeared, and Rewind was able to go back to it. As soon as that first moment happens, people's minds shift. Now it's all about convenience. And then people are starting to ask, hey, can you synchronize this data across my phone and my Mac? And can I ask questions on my Mac and my phone? And all of the things that we were so careful to avoid in the beginning, when people become activated and have seen that first magical moment, then their mindset shifts. And so now that's why we just launched iPhone. Soon we'll be launching the ability to, in an end-to-end encrypted way, synchronize data across your devices. And so we're sort of paving the path as our users are pushing us toward more and more of what they want. But it all, again, starts with a privacy-first approach. Everything is stored locally on your machine. We don't have access to it. And I think that's sort of foundational to giving the right return on investment for users as they think about adopting a new, different kind of technology.
You have integrated ChatGPT. In one of the videos, or maybe it was on your website, you mentioned that the information, because it is stored locally, isn't used to train any sort of models or LLM there. How does that work with ChatGPT? Because everything you pop into it is used to train the model.
Actually, that's incorrect. If you use the API for GPT-4, OpenAI has been very clear that they do not train any of their models using the GPT-4 API. If you use the consumer chat GPT interface on the website, they, I think, likely train, but they're very clear. It's like black and white on their website. Anything used through their API is not used to train. And not only that, but it's only retained for 30 days. So after 30 days, anything sent to the GPT-4 API is deleted. And again, even in those 30 days, nothing is used for training.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. I mentioned privacy and security. You were recently on and there's a little bit of a lead in here. You were recently on This Week in Startups with Jason Calacanis, and he came in, by the way, pretty fiery, but you calmed him down at the end, which, nicely done. It's no easy feat.
Thank you.
But he looked at it and he described his reaction to this as terrified and intrigued, and that he was uncomfortable using it now, right? He also pointed out potentially some of the legal liabilities. You already talked about how this stuff can't be subpoenaed. One of your use cases on your site, though, is for execs like our COO listeners. The most sensitive matters of a company come across our desktops. How do we get comfortable with it?
Yeah, I think if you zoom out and look at the broader world and imagine where we're going to be in 10 years, the companies that succeed or fail are we the ones that embrace AI as a way to get 10%, 20%, in some cases, 2 or 3 or 10 times better. And in those situations, the people who are actually the most successful in their roles as COOs are the ones that don't just say, my job in 10 years will be the same, but slightly different. It's going to be fundamentally different. Like, every decision I'm going to make is going to be informed through not just data, but AI synthesizing that data for me. I'm going to be able to be in 5 meetings at once, not just one. It's thinking that every minute of my day is precious, and if I can use technology to augment my memory, my capabilities, to give me superpowers, that is better for me, that's better for my company, that's better for the world. So I think it's in that broader landscape that you have to ask yourself, okay, if in a world, unless you think AI is just hype and it's going to go away, maybe that's true. I think more likely, fundamentally, the way we work every day will be different, and the companies that can actually credibly, like us, claim that privacy is at the core of what we do. We store data in a way that is almost impossible. It's by sort of the way it's foundationally designed, is the most privacy centric model. We, I think, will be your partner in surviving in that world. So you either have to say it's not going to be a big deal, the AI thing is not going to happen, or you have to say, I'm just going to pretend like it is a big deal. I'm going to be one of the companies that decides, it's not important for us, and then your company's not going to exist. So like in that sense, like I didn't create this whole AI wave. I'm just trying to help companies ride it. And if I can do that in a way that respects the privacy of their company, their data, my guess is maybe today your CIO is not going to be that keen, but in 3 or 4 years, when they see the alternatives, which is maybe entirely cloud-based solutions or ones in which data is used to train models, I think then it'll be pretty clear that this is the path for them.
I hadn't expected to have privacy so early on in AI. I had expected this to be something much further down the road. If we were to follow the trend of social media or search or things like this, privacy really doesn't get added in until people are up in arms about it. And so I love that you took the privacy and security approach first. And John, my CISO, are we cool with this now? Can I use it? I really want to. No, I'm sure he still says no, but I hope that we can bring him along. You talked about 10 years out, and you started talking about how the companies that don't embrace AI now are just set to fail. Similarly, I think something can be said around remote work and productivity and learning to be able to work and excel in that field. If we think about operations and the applications of AI, and I think you are very qualified to answer this question, having scaled Optimizely from nothing to 120 mil. What do we think the application beyond Rewind of AI in ops could be?
Yeah, the one word I would use is leverage. An analogy I'll draw is like, imagine thinking about ops in a world before computers and a world after computers. There's a lot of people in your company doing operations who had to do rote manual tasks with pens and paper, and you needed an army of people to do things that with the advent of computers now could be automated away. I think similarly, if not more so, AI is going to do the same thing. It's going to be a giant lever in which any one human being at your company can do 10 or 100 times more, and to do it joyfully, not because they're working harder, because they're working smarter with technology. And so the future looks like smaller teams doing more. Companies that don't embrace AI are going to be bigger teams that are going to be greater, competitive threat, at greater competitive threat. Markets will look at their company and say, "Hey, why do you have, everything you think today of what is a good P&L or balance sheet for your company in the future, when you compare your company and your industry with one that is a competitor that has embraced AI, is going to look fundamentally different." So expectations will rise from the public markets, from investors, and it'll be silly. Like I look at our company today. Today we're 18 people at Rewind. Many of us use AI every day to do our jobs better. No knock on Optimizely, but I feel like as a team of 18, we're able to do more quickly than a team of 450 I had when I was running Optimizely. And a big part of that is AI, it's technology, it's leverage. And so I think the future, if you're a COO and thinking about your company in the future, you should ask yourself, not, what is my, how do I get more people in my org chart? It's like, how do I make every one person in my company better, more augmented, more capable? Sure, there'll be some parts that maybe no longer exist, some teams that no longer need to exist. But for the most part, the leverage you're going to get isn't from replacing people with AI. It's going to be augmenting your existing people and making them 10 or 100 times more productive.
I completely agree with you, of course. When GPT-4 came out, basically we said to everyone in the company, hey, look, we don't know what this is going to be like, but you can definitely do more faster. And I have the app installed on my phone, and I just ask myself at the end of the day, how did GPT-4 make my life faster, and how did I do more today with it? I think the real big challenge for the company is twofold. The first is around privacy. We saw what happened with Samsung, how they had uploaded all of this proprietary IP. So first, it's making sure that everyone throughout the company, and when you're a 1,300 person company, that's complicated, but making sure everyone has an appreciation, okay, don't upload this or don't use your work email. The other part to it is that it's such a broad tool, and it asks people to essentially be creative in figuring out how it can augment it. You guys have gone in and you've taken a much more specified approach to it. And I love that. I don't know that there's a question in there. Those are just more like observations and feelings.
Yeah, I'll share one insight we had over the last few weeks, which is related. Which is, you're right that AI today, ChatGPT, is so broad you don't even know what to ask. We have found that the most powerful and valuable features we offer are ones where we sort of bridge the gap between that ambiguity and the task you're doing. A perfect example is today with Rewind. If you're in a meeting, a Zoom meeting with a colleague or a team meeting, the first thing they'll prompt up is say, join and record. We know you're about to join a meeting. You join. That's pretty helpful. At the end of the meeting, you get a little prompt that says, summarize and draft email. And what it will do is take everything you said, everything your colleague said, summarize it, and turn it into like a 5 bulleted list in a draft in your email inbox to the attendees of the meeting, knowing, because we know who's in the meeting, we know their names, and that's a perfect example of using technology to sort of bridge the gap between the ambiguity of what's possible with like the actual, like that is 5 things less. Now if you're, especially if you're in back-to-back meetings, there's no way you're going to write a summary. This makes you look good in front of your colleagues. You look like you've got a superpower. And that's the thing that I think AI is best served to do, is like bridge that gap between the things you're already going to do, but now instead of spending 15 minutes after every meeting summarizing, setting notes, action items, have the AI do it for you.
That's phenomenal, because oftentimes we'll have meetings. There will be great ideas that come up, great action items. And so often, unfortunately, things just get dropped, and talk was great, but then action didn't happen. This kind of ensures that at least people remember what the meeting was about, and then go to the next step and integrate with
Yeah.
Asana, turn them into action.
Yeah, and we found meetings are a black hole for information.
Yeah.
It's like you go there, everyone talks. Like I said earlier, the forgetting curve tells us 90% of what's going to happen in that meeting is forgotten the next weekly team meeting. And so just taking what's already said in a very expensive setting, everyone's salary for that 1 hour is not insignificant. And then taking that and turning the value insights in that into actual action follow up, that's super valuable to companies.
You mentioned 18 people. You have built so much, right? A small team doing very big things here. 450 people at Optimizely. Obviously, the tech has come a long way in enabling that. You have a phenomenally low burn rate and a lot of cash in the bank because of that. A lot of runway, a lot of ability to get out there, figure things out. How has AI, and I was going to say, oh, how have you done that? AI. We use AI, right? Outside of Rewind and the feature you just talked about, though, how do you all think about applying AI to do more with less?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just AI, by the way. It's a phenomenal team. Like I think hiring people well above, if I look back the first 18 people at Optimizely, the kind of people I work with today wouldn't have worked with me. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just like, they could have worked anywhere. They would have been making 3 or 4 times as much money working as fancy smancy individual contributor at Facebook or Google at the time. So I just think I feel fortunate that I've been able to hire truly exceptional people. And the myth of the 10x engineer is certainly true, and with AI it's the 100x engineer is the one that can do more with less. So that's, I think, a key part is really senior folks. It honestly, if I'm candid, makes me really worried what it's like for kids graduating today, in a world where people who have experience, who can use AI to make them even better. It's going to be a tough. I personally, we don't hire junior engineers. We only hire senior staff level, principal level engineers, designers. It's anyway. So that's a topic for what that means for society. But yeah, I mean, to do more with less comes with great people. I think another thing that I have learned the hard way is focus. I always at Optimize used to think I was focused, but then in hindsight now, boy, was I not? Steve Jobs has this famous quote that Johnny Ive recently retold, which was that focus to him meant not doing something that with every bone in your body you want to do, but you decide not to do that thing that you really, really want to do because you're focusing on something else. And that is a test, and I remind myself and my team, they're probably sick of me hearing it, but I say this saying that the main thing is that the main thing should stay the main thing. I say this over and over again because that is the curse of death for any organization, especially startups, is doing too much. It's indigestion, not starvation. It's saying, let's do Mac and iPhone and Android and Windows all on day one. We took a very different approach. We started with Mac very, very purposefully. We were getting requests. We had a huge waiting list of people dying to have our product on iPhone, but we waited. We spent really a year perfecting it, learning. And then when it came to iPhone, we could do it in 3 months because we learned all of these things around compression, around integration with AI, and like all the things that made it possible to do it right the first time. So I think that's probably the broader lesson is great team, really experienced team, great AI, and deep focus.
I love that. Okay, the main thing is the main thing is the main thing. 3 times? Is that it?
The main thing is that the main thing should stay the main thing.
Should stay the main thing.
And okay. I first heard this, I think HP had this as a cultural saying. I think somebody else famously quoted it, but I'd heard it from somebody who formerly worked at HP, and she said this, and I thought ever since, and this was maybe 10 years ago I heard it, and I only in the last 3 years, as I've been working on Rewind, have I really embraced that mantra.
That's fantastic. Okay. Might have to take that on. Normally my thing is if someone's, hey, this seems broken, but what do we do? How do we fix it? I default to 4 words, which is just who does what when. It's actually all quite simple. Just figure that out and it'll be smooth. The main thing is that the main thing should stay the main thing. Got it. Love it. You started getting into what jobs of the future look like. And I swear I didn't share my notes with you, but I actually have a question on this. Let's shift gears or shift back. Let's talk about kids in education. We're both dads. Right now, education, there's a huge focus on STEM. And in light of how quickly we're seeing the tech advances, especially for solving these structured problems, is STEM going to be as important in 20 years? And I'm asking you to look in the crystal ball here, but.
Yeah. I think yes, and maybe even more important. Maybe we will be standing on the shoulders of giants, so much so in 10 or 20 years that like it's just too inconceivable to be so low in the implementation details of science. Implementation detail of science, I mean like the physics, the underlying, because there's I think somebody once looked at all of the things you would need to know to make a common pencil, and it was like huge amounts of science, like metallurgy and chemistry and all this. So maybe it's and I look at my education. There's so many things I learned that I probably don't use every day today. So like learning how to learn will always be important, and learning how to build will always be important. And I think STEM really helps you learn how to build, how to be creative, how to use the tools that are at your disposal at any time to build something. Today that's maybe much more rudimentary than it'll be in 10 or 20 years. But the idea of always taking what you have around you and building something with it, I think that's going to be fundamental. It's hard to imagine that that's not going to be the most important thing people have to be good at in the future. I was lucky in high school. I was on the robotics team, and that was like one of the things I really learned was like how to build physical things out of the things around you. We had this competition, and it was all about like how do you use the constraint of the materials you have to build something great. And I similarly, at Optimizely, I viewed that very much so as like, what can JavaScript let you do that wasn't possible before with browsers getting as fast as they are. And that's what sort of inspired the first version of Optimizely, client-side A/B testing that was easy for marketers to use. And similarly today with Mac, it's very similar. Like we would not exist today if not for Apple Silicon and M1 chips and M2 chips and the hardware. We started the product basically realizing, wow, actually, this stuff is really good and fast. How can we use it to solve this problem that before this technology existed, we couldn't solve? So I think that meta skill of sort of looking around and thinking, how do I use technology to solve a real problem in the world? That I think STEM teaches really well, and I think will be important for our kids and their kids.
Yeah, we still have a really long way to go before we have intergalactic travel. It's really not going anywhere, is it?
Yeah.
You mentioned M1, M2 silicon. I was very interested. There was a podcast that I saw. I didn't have time to listen to it, but this is very deep into tech for you all to go, oh my gosh, look at the M1 and M2. Like, how can we leverage that? That didn't happen overnight. Like, take us into your brain.
Yeah. And by the way, you said something there I just want to remind you of. You said there's a podcast I didn't have time to listen to. That is the persona of the person for whom our product is perfect. Instead of listening to the podcast, ask the question, what was that thing Dan said about M1, M2? Like, those are the kinds of things that why would you spend an hour of your life listening to a podcast when you can synthesize it, get the action that you're looking for? Anyway, I just thought that was like a perfect example of why our product and products like ours is going to make your life much better in the future. But yeah, I mean,
sorry, would I be able to play it on 10x speed and it would get it and we'd be good? No.
Yeah, I mean, or you just ask a question of it. Like if you have podcasts, you just send it to Rewind and ask Rewind, hey, like what did what are the takeaways? Summarize it. Or when Dan talks about M1, what did he say? Those are the kinds of things that maybe you do now manually. Like I do this too. Like I'll be like, oh, I swear I saw this quote in a book. And I'm like, I'll listen to it on Audible. Instead, I buy it on Kindle. Then I'm command Fing in the Kindle to try to find it. It's like totally broken. I should just be able to send the thing I heard to Rewind, have Rewind do the synthesis for me, tell me, hey, this is the thing you were looking for. And oh, by the way, here are the 3 other references to in the book. And anyway, a bit of an aside there. But yeah, so your question is, how do we get to this conclusion around M1, M2, and sort of the technology, the neighborhood technology? Well, it started with, I kind of alluded to, we pivoted from another idea. So when we started the company, we had built what today is called like a meeting bot. It joins Zoom meetings, it's in the cloud, captures everything that's said in the meeting, transcribes it, does sort of like some, gives you kind of like a pie chart of how long each person spoke. And that was kind of our first foray into our approach in giving humans superpowers. We thought meetings was a good place to start. But very quickly, we realized there's so much more context you have outside the meeting that would make that you need to really make that successful. And we also realized that we are in this point where everyone felt weird about bots. Like having a meeting with a bot is kind of creepy. It's out in the cloud. That's really a data privacy concern. Like that bot is somewhere, some hard drive somewhere. Google Cloud has the data of that. And so we thought with M1, M2 coming out, we looked at it, and the vision that I had for the company from the beginning finally became possible. Now, everything that we were doing in the cloud, we could do locally. And if we could do it because the technology was good enough to do the compression, we could do transcription all locally. That's why we can transcribe what you're saying all locally. So the privacy goal now is finally realizable. Like it wasn't before. The technology, like your computer would crawl to a stop if you try to do what we do today before Apple Silicon. So that was really the reason we invested in it. It was a big, we had a big debate, and we had a whole strategy doc, 5 different strategies we were considering, of which one of them is the one we ended up pursuing, this kind of better memory strategy. In fact, 3 of the people on the team voted that the last choice of the 5. So it was not an obvious decision to focus on learning, Apple native development and learning Swift and how to build a native app. But it was the one that was the most likely, if it were to work, to be a transformative technology. And it turned out it did. So I'm glad we did. That was another example of something I learned from Optimizely, is being decisive and focused. And it wasn't obviously the right choice, but in hindsight, working pretty well.
I would love to see those other 4. So let me ask, and only because I have scar tissue. Talk to me about platform risk. This is something that runs on a machine, right? We talked about this ad nauseum. Do you worry, right? You just did the iOS app. Apple is famous for being very private when it comes to iOS. Do you worry that some of the moves that Apple might make further down the road might disrupt Rewind's product?
It's definitely something I think about. There's 4 advantages we have today, and I'm more worried, frankly, about Apple becoming a competitor than really pulling the rug out from underneath us. Because the good news is, when we started this company, there's one of 2 paths. Either what we're doing is a good idea or a bad idea. If it's a bad idea, it would fail. It's a good idea, and so with it being a good idea, it will attract the attention of big tech, including Apple. But we today benefit from a couple things. One, what we do is weird. And when something's weird and maybe even borderline creepy, lots of people at a big company will tell you not to do it. I know for a fact there are people at Apple who think that like the future of Apple services revenue will be something like what Rewind does. But for every one of those, people fighting the fight, there's 100 people at Apple to tell you no, and here's why not, and brand and privacy and concerns. And so that it sort of comes down to basically the innovator's dilemma. Like we are, and that's going to be a huge advantage for us. I hope for a few years. I think eventually Apple will do what we do. But if you look at something as comparable, if you look at like Dropbox versus iCloud, Apple tried to buy Dropbox, they didn't want to sell, they sort of competed and built iCloud. That was, first of all, many years after they probably should have. And in that market, that is a very low switching cost. You just drag the files from one to the other. We are a very different product. Everything you capture with our product is encrypted locally on your database. It's by design, not something that snooping eyes or other products can consume. So it's the switching costs are incredibly high. So that's our huge advantage. And speed of execution. We release 11 times a day. I give my cell phone number to every pro subscriber. When Tim Cook starts doing that, then I know they'll take us seriously. So those are our advantages today. So that's more broadly around Apple as a competitor. I think from a platform perspective, we don't break any rules. We play all by the same rules that they have in the APIs. Everything is a published API. Like, if anything, they love what we do. One of the first things we got when we announced our product was, this is so crazy. I did not expect this. We first announced November 1st. Within days, I was getting people emailing me with receipts of purchasing new Apple laptops, because we said we're only going to work on M1 chips. And it's people saying, I love what your guys doing so much. I just went out and bought a $1,900 laptop to use your product. So in that sense, we are Apple's, that's the reason Apple has built this great platform. It's for developers like us to build software that drives hardware sales. So I'm not too worried about them pulling the rug out from us, given that they get quite a bit of revenue from users who want our product.
Yeah, and that's also like the question that some will ask is, what happens if Google does this? Well, then either they buy us or we're out of business. I don't know what to tell you, but nonetheless, this is how things develop.
Well, I actually think we have a credible claim to build a successful independent company. If you look at the big tech companies, Google, this would be there's rumors even Larry and Sergey, when they built Google Desktop, their vision for that long ago was something like what we do today. But like I said, technology wasn't there yet, couldn't do it. But even Google, like, they have a fundamental business model conflict. Their innovator's dilemma is like, if Google offered exactly what it did today, we would crush them, because all we would have to say is, do you want ads targeted better because of the data that you collect? And so they have fun. And we are a subscription service. You pay us money. We don't have access to the data. Google's approach would be very different. So I think they're the least of my concerns. I think Apple is the only of the big tech companies who could do this. But again, what we do is weird and creepy. Hopefully no one important at Apple's listening to this. If as long as they think we're weird and creepy and we can fly under the radar, I think we can build years of a head start. And you know what? Honestly, one day, I love Apple. If we were to join forces with them, I'm very happy to acquire them. I have no problem. I have no problem with that. I think culturally it'd be a good fit. It's just, it's going to be a while before I think that's going to work out.
Yeah, no, you got to have goals, right? You got to have goals. Let's get back into some operations a little. Now, you have a chief of staff. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
And you had that at Optimizely and now have it at Rewind as well. Tell me a little bit about that decision. Why a chief of staff? And then how do you work together?
Yeah. We have a chief of staff here. I also had a COO at Optimizely, so I've definitely had that experience. But yeah, we work together very collaboratively. I think of her as an extension of me. So the things that I would otherwise do, but don't have time to do, or she would be just as well suited, if not better, to do, she owns. So there's a set of things in that camp. A lot of the administrative stuff. Thinking through, we do quarterly retreats. We all go together, and so thinking through how to set those up for success. Just recently, a topic that was very important that I wanted to spend time as a group working through was psychological safety, talking about what that means and having a candid conversation with that. So she did a great job of owning that, thinking through how to have that conversation. And so, in that sense, I see it as just an extension of me as the CEO, and she's able to bring her unique skills and perspective. I'm much more excited about what's possible and open-minded and optimistic. She's much more, execution oriented and sort of traditional COO kind of mindset, which is also a really good compliment. And similarly at Optimize, I had a COO who also, he actually ran a huge part of the company, but was fantastic as being a compliment to myself. And it was one of those things where, 1 + 1 = 3, where, I could bring my unique perspective, that orientation can bring theirs, and together we get to a much better rational view of the world and a path.
Interesting. Tell me about, did you have the COO and the chief of staff simultaneously?
I did. Yeah, at Optimize, I did. Yeah.
What was that like? What was that interaction? How did they work together?
Yeah. I didn't see often how the two of them worked, when I wasn't there, but together we as a team worked really well. I think the COO at Optimize, the fantastic, one of the best executives ever hired, he actually was promoted from within. He was our CFO actually for a long period of time. And then he took on customer success and managed that part of the company, became our COO, was a fantastic thought partner, and was very, very much wanted, and when I think coming to the company, wanted a partner in the CEO to work together to build something great, much more strategic. My chief of staff, I had some fantastic chief of staffs at Optimizely. Many of them have gone off to be chiefs of staff to the stars, like Elon Musk and the Collins brothers. So I feel really good that I'm like a stepping stone on their ever progressing career of success. But I know what good looks like because I can see where they ended up. So in those roles, I think one of the things that I really valued was somebody who could take a very ambiguous, ill-formed thought of mine. Like I could utter a sentence without much structure, and they could actually translate it into the organization. Kind of what you said earlier, like who, what, when, or whatever. Like they could be good at making sure that these often dumb ideas, but sometimes there's some kernels of good ideas turned into the next steps. They didn't just die on the vine, but they were sort of translated in the day to day. They're good at holding, sort of keeping processes in place to hold people accountable, making sure that the things we were talking about in one setting got translated to another. And yeah, it's a fantastic role. Highly recommend. I can't imagine being a CEO without a chief of staff, or eventually probably a COO.
That's fantastic. Now, you just said you know what good looks like clearly. So everything that you just discussed, though, is things that you learn and experience once they're in the role. How do you screen for that?
Pretty poor. I do not know, because I've never really. I'm more lucky than good. I've made some mishires, and I honestly am just more lucky than good. I do not know how to screen for really good chiefs of staffs or COOs. Like I said, our COO is actually promoted from within. It's a really hard. It's a really hard job, because a lot of it is also just that unique partnership with the CEO, and like how do you that intermeshing. Each CEO is different. What they need in this role is different. You need somebody who's different enough from you, but complements you in a way that actually together you're able to be. If I were a perfect CEO, I could do all the things the COO could do, but I'm not. I've got my flaws, I got my strengths, my weaknesses, and I need somebody who can complement those. And mutually we respect. Like they're great at one part of the world and how to lead, and I'm great at another, and together we can do more. And I think that's actually, if I look back at the best CEOs and folks, it's them also recognizing that they're not the end all be all. Like they couldn't really do the job of CEO. They know that actually, hey, what I'm best suited for on this planet is to be a great COO partnering with a CEO. And it's not so much like, oh, I could just do their job and I'm not there yet. It's like, see it as truly a true partnership, not a, well, I'm just in some other role, and one day I hope to be a CEO role.
When you were at Optimizely and steering the helm, you were at, I think, 450 people or so, and Optimizely was ranked the number one best place to work by the San Francisco Business Times. You talk now about psychological safety. That certainly goes a long way to people feeling comfortable. How did you approach just achieving that? How did you approach building such a fantastic place to be?
It starts with values, and not just talking the talk around values, but walking the walk. So we early on at Optimizely made a commitment to a set of values. It's spelled out an acronym: Optify: ownership, passion, trust, integrity, fearlessness, and transparency, with a Y at the end. So Optify. And for each of those values, we had a very specific set of behaviors that lived up to those values. And those behaviors they weren't just obvious. Integrity is kind of obvious, but a lot of companies like Enron, on the day of their collapse, and if you walked in the lobby of Enron, it was actually emblazoned into stone, the word integrity. So, and that's what I mean by walking the walk. So I think we did that well. I think one of the things I learned out how important it is to be, to at least put it pen to paper. People talk at Google. One of the things that killed me was, I interviewed like 1,000 people at Google, even though I was like a very low person on the totem pole. Like we were hiring like crazy. And every person I interviewed, I had to assess them on how googly they were. And there was no definition for googliness. And that was like the thing that killed me. Like I decided, if I want to start a company, at least I want to define what our culture is, so that it doesn't become a recipe for unconscious bias. It's not like, oh, they weren't a culture fit. Well, like there's no definition of what our culture is. So, and so that was my first goal, is like define what the culture is. And then the second was, how do we live those cultural values? And the way I did that was, anytime I had to make an important decision, I would always open a culture doc. We had a document that described it. I always went back to that as kind of the Constitution. I thought of it as very much like I'm a Supreme Court justice. I've got to look at the law. I have to ask myself, what's going to best live up to these values? And some of the hardest decisions I made, I use our culture or the values in our culture as the sort of deciding factor. And then when I made the decision, I would explain why. I said, the reason why I'm deciding to do this is because, as our culture talked about, fearlessness is important, and much rather, many decisions are two-way doors, and blah, 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 blah. So that was the thing that I think helped it Optimizely. I've evolved that substantially here at Rewind. I think we mistook cute and simple as more valuable than like comprehensive. And so in Rewind, we have actually 14 cultural values. No fancy acronym. We have 2 high level themes of impact and teamwork. And we put our culture doc up there. If you go to rewind.ai/careers, you'll see there's a culture doc link. It's the same Notion doc we use internally as we share externally. You can see all the comments. And that defines really, and every quarter we do 360s. And every 360, the key criteria, everything you evaluate each other on, is how well does this person live up to our cultural values? And that's another factor that like shows us that we walk the walk. Like I'm held accountable to our culture by my team. Similarly, I hold them accountable. So we just create cultural values as the DNA of the company. And I think that's when everyone has that shared understanding, I think that creates psychological safety. Everyone has a clarity on what's expected of them. So that's how we've done it, I think.
14, do you foresee your values evolving similarly to GitHub, right? GitHub, or no, was it GitLab? Excuse me.
Yeah, they absolutely. It's the living. Every new hire, I tell them, our culture is a living document, and you can go to again. You literally go to Rewind.ai/careers. You can see a culture memo there. We explain what our values are. You can see the revision history. We tweak them all the time. They're pretty well baked today, but we ask ourselves at a regular cadence. We do retrospectives every 2 months. We want to make sure that we've defined these values in a way that serve us. They're not meant to be lip service. They're not meant to be recruiting tactics. We hope people come to us because of our values, but only because it's a match for them, not because there's some kind of marketing gimmick. Because this is also how we hold each other accountable. Like we know every quarter, you'll know, how am I living up to transparency? How am I living up to decisiveness? How am I living up to resourcefulness? These are values that we think will make us successful, and that's why we use them as the basis for performance management.
And then talk to me about psychological safety, which is something that you mentioned previously. Tell us about that. Why was it something that you focused on? Why now, and how?
Yeah, I mean, we focused on it in part because we felt there's an opportunity to have a shared language and vernacular. In many ways, just talking about it creates it because people know, oh, Dan seems to care about psychological safety. Maybe that's something that's important to him. So I think if you're thinking about talking about it, do talk about it, because I think the more you talk about it, the more people feel it. It's also something that if I look back at some of my regrets about Optimizely, there's a 2x2 quadrant. I can try to pull it up in psychological safety. And I think the 2x2 quadrant, the axes of the 2x2 quadrant, one is comfortable, yes, no. And the other one is like accountable, yes, no, something like, or maybe something like candid or something. And in each of those quadrants, they describe it as a certain thing. The ideal of psychological safety is like comfortable and candid, and comfortable and accountability. Like you have the balance of, you feel like you can say what you think, you don't have to worry about the repercussions of what you say, and you're being held accountable to a high standard, and that high standard doesn't create a lack of psychological safety. And Optimizely, we started that way, and then over time, as we got successful, we had like amazing Series A and B. Like we got this collective disease of getting comfortable but without accountability. We were kind of like, the way I think it was, like we all had locked arms, kind of kumbaya off a cliff. I'd much rather somebody yell out, "There's a cliff," and be willing to admit that, than everyone feel this false sense of security. And that's the thing I really wanted to avoid at Rewind, is like, even though, and especially things are going well, I feel like it's my job as a leader to remind people, like, it's not always going to be up and to the right. Like there will be moments in time where it's going to be hard. Like we're going to have times when, who knows, Apple launches the exact clone of what we do and offers it for free. Like in those moments, we need to have that candor and that muscle around kind of a wartime mentality and high accountability for one another that you lose when things are good.
And it's operating as a unit. When you're talking about that, you can't operate as a unit if people aren't feeling safe to be able to contribute.
Yeah, and it's also related to, I mean, just knowing that I expect everyone on the team, if they see something, say something. Like their job isn't just to be a cog in the machine. I hired incredibly experienced, highly capable people. I pay them top of market compensation, not just because of the title that they were hired for, but because of their smart general perspective point of view. And so if an engineer sees something wrong in our marketing, they should say something. If our designer thinks that I'm making a bad decision, they should say something. Like that's part of the contract I'm trying to build, is that I know I'm not perfect. I know I have a lot of dumb ideas. I want to create an environment where I can throw those dumb ideas out there, and the bad ones all get ripped to shreds and shut down. The good ones get watered a little bit and turned into something great, and not just for me, but everyone on the team as well.
Yeah. How do you maintain that? You grew Optimizely, right? You've talked a little bit about the lessons you've learned, what you've wanted to do differently. I mean, this is your 18 people now, and Rewind's going to be around for a long, long time, hopefully. It will. I don't mean to throw in the hopefully. That was grim there. No, but as you go on, it's just so important.
First, yeah, I mean, I hope to do this as my life's work. I want to be doing Rewind for decades to come, and our vision is to give humans superpowers, and I think it's going to be quite a while before we achieve the full scope of what that could mean. So I do think it starts with, then I guess, with a long-term orientation. And from that, ironically, comes a conclusion, which is to hire slowly. I've been very purposeful and like not making the mistake I made at Optimizing. And Optimizing, we raised a $28 million Series A and then a $57 million Series B. And then that alone would have been fine. We raised a lot of money. Great. Got cash in the bank. But then we coupled that with a secondary mistake of then spending it. It was hard for me as a first-time CEO. I hired this amazing head of marketing. They're like, oh, we need a comms person. We need this person. And I was like, okay, if that's what you say for marketing, great. And not having that constraint, that willingness to say no and focus and say, let's try to do more with 18 and see how that goes than, to do maybe less or even the same with 30 or 40, which we could have easily done by now. I think that's going to help a lot. That's how you maintain kind of the culture. You don't let it go from what I saw at Optimizely, which was like a high psychological safety, high accountability, to a safe but kind of like I would say low accountability culture. That's part of it. Is it's growing slowly. It's being very purposeful in the recruiting process. I very, very much believe in references now. I didn't do a good job of that in my first company, leaning into references. Now, like that is almost the most important part of the recruiting process is doing really good references, back channel references, and being willing. And I've done this, being willing to say no to a phenomenal candidate who checks all the boxes on, can they do the job? Are they a great engineer? Are they great? But they fail on the cultural aspects and they fail in the references. We're willing to say no to great people because we think that it's more important to build the right DNA and the culture up front than it is to have a amazing tactician for the next 6 months or a year, but ultimately will be kind of a cancer to the culture.
Do you have a favorite reference question?
I do. My favorite reference question is usually I do 15-minute references, and then most of it is just building rapport to get them to be honest so that when I ask this question, they actually give me an answer. So the question is near the end, I'll ask, hey, Michael, look, we're probably going to hire Bob. But if we hire Bob and in 6 months, you and I bump into each other and I tell you it did not work out with Bob, what is your first instinct as to why? And usually with that lens, with that accountability of, look, I'm going to bump into you and you're going to tell me, and people like to predict the future, that's where I'll get the truth. Then I'll get something that's like, well, what happened is Bob probably got disengaged. Bob probably got excited for the first few weeks. And then maybe Bob decided he wants to go start a startup or whatever. And you realize, okay, this person's maybe not committed. Maybe they're not focused. You hear the things that otherwise don't come out when you ask for strengths and weaknesses. And anyway, that's been so far my most successful question.
Such a great question. Where'd that come from? Is this?
I don't know. I'm sure I stole it from somebody. For a long time when I did references, you wouldn't be surprised given my experience in Optimizing, I would A/B test my questions. And I literally would just, every time I would do a reference,
Of course you did.
And this question just took. I started to ask it. I probably heard it somewhere. And it just started to get things that had I not asked that question, I would have not had information. It's really hard in the back channel reference to somebody you don't know to get them to be honest with you in 15 minutes is really, really hard. Like the stakes are pretty high for them. The return for them is not very low. So this question, for whatever reason, strikes the right balance of like, hey, you're going to bump into me? Okay, I don't want to look like an idiot and not tell you the one thing you really should know about this person.
Yeah. Important distinction there. That's back channel reference.
Well,
big believer in the back channel.
I ask the same question of regular references as well. And usually the other trick I do there is I never ask the candidate to introduce me to a reference. Instead, I'll ask the candidate, give me a list of 5 references, title, their email, a little blurb, how you know them. And then I'll reach out. Even that subtle difference alone, you get a lot more honest. If there's a direct one-on-one introduction, oftentimes the reference won't be as candid. And then usually I'll ask at the end of those references, by the way, this is something my chief of staff now has taken on, and she's done fantastic. She's now does these references for me and can do them just as well as I can, if not better. But usually at the end of those 5 references we ask them, who's somebody else who might give us a unique perspective on this candidate? And then you get to that first order. And then usually the thing is, even if that first reference who knew that they were given doesn't want to say anything bad, what they might do is give you the person who's going to give you the real dirt, because they won't feel as bad about that. They're like, oh, who you should talk to? I think Dylan might have a really unique perspective on Bob. Like, go talk to Dylan. And then we reach out to Dylan. Dylan's like, oh, do not hire Bob. You're the fight. Like, that's when you also get some truth, because people want to be honest. They don't want you to be saddled with, a bad hire. So it's just, sometimes it's not in their best interest.
You see me smiling because that's my last question that I love. Not necessarily the last, but it's in there. I actually had someone ping me and he's like, hey, you're talking to 25 people. What's going on here? You're reaching out. Like, just make sure that someone doesn't find out that I'm looking. I'm like, I know. But yeah, there's so much value in doing those. And I'm mindful of our time here. I am. This is just a great conversation. You mentioned getting people to go at ease, right, in the beginning so that you can ask that question and get a true answer. So building that rapport. What's your approach?
Usually I'll start with the approach generally is I want them to leave this experience very positive, because often maybe we might be recruiting them down the line. So part of it is me selling them on our idea or vision. I don't miss the opportunity to tell our story, explain why what we're doing, how I was inspired of my losing my hearing and the desire to create superpowers. So I don't make it as transactional. I make it more relationship, even though it's a short meeting. I also don't want to make it too long because I don't, they're doing them me a favor. So trying to strike the right balance. And generally it's around respect, treating them in a way that I would want to be treated if I would ask as a reference, letting them know how much we appreciate it, how meaningful this is to the decision, how much we value them as an expert on this person, making them feel as important as they are, because they are. I truly believe, I have been asked to do references for people, and I can tell the person asking me and interviewing me on the candidate has already made up their mind, or they don't care what I have to say. They're just checking a box. And when they do that, I'm so much less likely to want to give them the actual honest answer, because I'm like, look, why would I take a risk and tell you something that might piss off this person? Because it's true and probably not something they want other people to know. But if you're already going to make up your mind, you're going to hire them, then what's the point? So that's another part. Is I try to treat the reference or the person I'm talking to the same way I would want to be treated if I'm being asked to do a reference.
We've gone way over time. I had so many questions that I wanted to talk about that we didn't get to. It's unfortunate. Maybe we have time for my final and favorite, which is
Sure.
As execs, we have had those times where something comes up and it's just never thought I'd see that. That is absolutely crazy. Do you have one that you can share with us?
The best one, the first instinct as to the question is related to something I said earlier, which is, it's going to sound so dumb, this AI thing is pretty freaking good. This whole AI, the first time I saw a summarization, just this morning, we had an executive team meeting, 90-minute meeting, went a little long. I was running Rewind on it, and we summarized it into 5 bullet points. And it was so freaking good. It reminded me of my first job at Google as an associate product manager. My job is to take notes. I'm straight out of college, taking notes for these senior executives, just, typing away. And I couldn't have done as good as the AI did in summarizing the content, the substance, the objectiveness. So if you have not had these moments in the last 6 months since ChatGPT came out, where you're just not blown away by what AI can do that probably a human couldn't even do, then you're not looking hard enough, because these things are just so magical. So I'll just leave it there. It's to say, if you've not had that moment, you get your head out of the sand and try some of these products, because the things they can do today are just truly mind blowing. They're changing the world.
I have that moment, but another moment that I think of that is the moment was when I first held an iPhone in 2007. And I was outside in Colorado in an open air market. Before that, I had this LG flip phone, which I actually have right here. Crazy enough, my daughter was playing with it. The screen is broken, but I held it and I went, holy crap, I have humanity's knowledge in the palm of my hand. So it was remarkable. I had that same thing. Dan, this is awesome. Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed this conversation. We might have to have another and rewind further. See, I was going to do that. I wanted to use the word rewind to recollect something multiple times, and I held off until now. Anyways, Dan, where can people go to keep you and learn more about Rewind?
Rewind.ai.
Perfect. There you have it. Well, thank you very much for listening to Between Two COOs. I'm your host, Michael Kanag, and a very special thank you to Dan Sroker for joining us today. Tune in next time for our next COO chat on Between Two COOs, and be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, blah, 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 blah. You have the idea. Tune in to the next episode, and until then, so long.